All right, it appears, PL, that we are live. So we're going to be discussing The Winter King, which is
Yes.
the very first book in the Warlord Chronicles by Bernard Cornwell. And I'm really excited to be talking about this with you, PL. Just, it is important that I read this because I was going to delete my channel if I didn't read the Warlord Chronicles this year. So this was a priority for sure. And I'll talk about whether or not I actually liked it in a bit. But first, I want to talk about why PL. How do you feel about now you're a veteran of this. I actually talking to you just now, I didn't realize, I knew it was a reread for you, but you've reread this probably you don't even know how many times, right? This is a favorite. Talk about your assessment of this. We're going to start non-spoiler for people who haven't even read The Winter King. And then we'll go into spoilers for only The Winter King, not for the rest of the trilogy, because I haven't read it yet. So please, no spoilers beyond The Winter King in the comments. But PL, what does this series mean to you? What does the Warlord Chronicles mean to you?
Well, first of all, I'm honored to be here, Philip. Thanks so much for having me. Yes, this is one of my favorite series of all time. I posted a video a while back. I kind of separate my favorite fantasy series into traditional versus self-pub. This is in the top 5 for self-pub. It is actually my favorite trilogy. It's surpassed Lord of the Rings, if you can believe that. And I know you're huge, of course, you're a Tolkien scholar. So that just goes to show you how much, I find this series endearing. There's so many things that I love about it, but we'll get into that later on. But it does rank in my top 5 favorite fantasy series of all time.
Wow. Oh, traditionally published.
Yes.
Because you separate those two things.
Yes, I do.
Trad and indie. That's a huge endorsement. That's tremendous. So I will tell people, I've been, anyone who's asked me, I've already said, but so this is not a shock. And a few of our friends here on this platform have been interested in how I might feel about the Winter King, because they think it's something I might like. And yeah, they're right. I loved it. It was a lot of fun. I had a great time. I'm a big fan of Arthurian retellings and the matter of Britain in general. So this was a nice little, wrinkle. Bernard Cornwell does a lot of things that are different, which is refreshing in a way. He does something very different with, so far anyway, and I'm sure it's going to remain the case. But for example, one of the main things he does, and this is the guy who writes. He's famous, of course, for writing historical fiction and being very well researched when he does so. So he knows his stuff, and he's done a really good job of making this Dark Age Britain, which is not really. Even though, so this is complicated because it's even problematic whether we should even call it historical fiction, because there's really not much history per se in the Arthurian legends. It's mostly legend and myth. It's not really history at all. But what Cornwell has done is he's taken the myths and the legends that grew up during the Middle Ages, beginning with the Welsh tales, some of which you can find in the Mabinogion, and which some of the later tales in the Mabinogion were actually influenced by the later Arthurian stuff, but some of the earlier tales show us what a Celtic Arthur would have been like. And then, of course, you've got people like Geoffrey of Monmouth who picked this up, and Chrétien de Troyes, and Thomas of Britain, and Marie de France, and all kinds of writers throughout the Middle Ages, in the High Middle Ages, and this whole Arthurian thing became essentially the canvas upon which the writers of the Middle Ages explored their own ideals, their chivalric ideals. So it became something lifted entirely out of time and transcending time into this story that, and with so many different versions. And of course, having captured the imagination of so many different writers and kingdoms and all that, it's been retold so many times by some great modern writers, from Alfred Tennyson to one of my favorites is Mary Stuart. But there's just so many different versions of the Arthurian story in modern times. So this seems like a big one, and I'm glad that I'm finally reading this one. And what I wanted to say before I started blabbing about all that was Cornwell's different from almost all of those in that he really makes this Dark Age Britain. This feels like, you know, the Celts in the wake of the Romans abandoning Britain and dealing with the Anglo-Saxon invasions and their own infighting, and some warlord, some war leader comes along and briefly unites these Celtic Britons, these Romanized Britons, in their fight against the Saxon invaders, and that's the kernel of it, really. But Cornwell takes all these later myths and legends and stuff, and kind of fits it into that historical time period, as opposed to most of the other tellings from the Middle Ages feel like more like the High Middle Ages, not the Dark Ages. They feel much later than that. So I don't know if you want to say anything in reaction to anything I just said or not, but feel free.
No, absolutely, and I love that this feels, as you so eloquently mentioned, so grounded in reality, post-Roman Britain. But yet the Romans looming large as this presence that has essentially abandoned Britain, and now what's left is the Anglo-Saxons are poised to take over, and can these British kingdoms resist, right? And along with that, a clash of cultures and a fight for survival of the Britain's elder gods and their religion, and I love that element as well. So and yes, I think I totally agree with you that removing more of the later centuries, the 12th, 13th, 14th century interpretations of Arthur, and grounding him back into the original, where the original legend emanated, in this late 5th, early 6th century war leader that wasn't a king, because all of the later interpretations, he's a king. He's the king of essentially the entirety of Britain. But in this context, in Cornwell's context, he's a war leader of one of the kingdoms, which happens to be the kingdom of the High King of Britain. Demonia as it exists at that time. But I loved in terms of the historicity, I think people also, because Arthur is traditionally accepted as a historic person, whether he exists or not. Of course, that's a scholarly debate. I'm sure you've had many of those debates, perhaps, in some of your courses at school, whether teaching and or with when you were doing your actual academic work for your doctorate, etc. And I love the debate about whether or not Arthur was real. But I believe that this book, although it's clearly fiction, it really makes him feel realer to me than all of the other wonderful interpretations that I've read. It feels real. This feels like historical fiction, and I that's one of the reasons I absolutely love it.
Yeah. At the same time, whoops, I highlighted the wrong one. I would agree with Heidi that this is fantasy, honestly, more than it is historical fiction. Even though Cornwell has done his homework, he has made it feel like Dark Age Britain.
Yeah.
There are clearly elements of magic in here at play. And it is really just spun from myth and legend. And so I would agree with Heidi that it really, to me, I would define this as fantasy more than as historical fiction. But yeah, so I did want to talk about Old Man Logan's question here. How did we find the Welsh influence? Do you want to say anything about that, PL, before I answer?
Well, because details of Arthur's history are mainly composed of Welsh mythology and English folklore, we go back, for me, as far as I recall, this is now going back to my English classes. It was a Welsh cleric named Ninius that he essentially that's where Arthur's tale originated. And I remember reading almost every Arthurian interpretation I've read has some element of the Battle of Badon. Mm-hmm. And there's these fanciful accounts where Arthur supposedly slew 1,000 men, single-handedly, etc. But and although the Welsh uh, origins are fantastic, I think it's the Historia Bretonum. That's 9th century Latin. That's a historical compilation. They all attribute that to Nennius, but that was my first encounter with Arthur in school, because I also took medieval English with a minor in history, and that was my first encounter with the historical Arthur. Obviously, growing up and reading, the Morte d'Arthur, etc., I did know all of the origins, but then when I got to school, that's where the Welsh came in for me.
Yeah. Yeah, so there was actually Gildas, who preceded Nennius by a few centuries, does mention a war leader, but does not mention Arthur by name, but lists some of the battles that Nennius later ascribed to Arthur. So Gildas was writing in the 6th century, contemporary almost, really, with the events. But he spent most of his time just scolding the local kings, and that sort of thing. But he alludes to this war leader, and then Nennius later on, 3 centuries later, names him. So yeah, there is a difference. But for me, I love the Welsh influence. I spent time in Wales learning to speak Welsh when I was 19, the summer that I turned 20. And this was a delight. I mean, and Cornwell does a great job of lifting from local legends and tales. So Dervel, for example, is a real historical person who was a monk who was said to have fought with Arthur. He was sainted as well. Dervel Gadarn. Now, Cornwell does call him Cadarn with a hard C, but in Welsh you would actually mutate that C to a G. So it's Dervel Gadarn. And you got to roll your R's when you're speaking Welsh. That is, I love that part of the language. And yeah, so Cornwell just does a brilliant job of picking little things that are talked about in local myth and legend, and some of the bigger things, like, for example, Lancelot. He was a character made up by Chrétien de Troyes much later than the real Welsh and Breton lays and legends and so forth, some of which made their way into the Mabinogion. But the character just took off, because he became very popular. He became the epitome of great knights and everything else. Now, Cornwell's version of Lancelot is the least sympathetic I've ever encountered. And it's an interesting take. I have no objection personally. But for people who are maybe not as familiar with other Arthurian stories, if you've only read this, you'd think Lancelot is the worst ever. But he's actually, if you read Mallory, Morte d'Arthur, Mallory loves Lancelot. He's his hero. And yes, Lancelot does. I don't think this is a spoiler because we're talking about a more than 1,000-year-old story here. But in the case of Mallory, it's 15th century. Okay, so it's 600 years old. So sorry for the spoiler, but Lancelot and Guinevere's relationship is what. Look at what Alan is saying here. Mallory is wrong. Mallory was 600 years before Bernard Cornwell, Alan. So I'm okay. So I don't know, but yes, his Cornwell's Lancelot really does suck. But for Mallory, Lancelot was the epitome of chivalry.
Yes.
He had that one flaw though, because he's human, which was an affair with Guinevere, and that unraveled the whole kingdom. I mean, that was the beginning of the end in a sense. But it's a much more sympathetic portrayal of Lancelot, let's say. But we're not getting into spoilers with Cornwell's Lancelot and just why he sucks yet. But I will agree with Alan that he really does really suck. So
it's very interesting because Le Morte d'Arthur, of course, again portraying Lancelot as a flawed but highly chivalrous and noble character. You go to The Once and Future King by T.H. White. He is which essentially is almost like a parody of Le Morte d'Arthur, but he makes Lancelot ugly for the first time, physically not attractive, right? And also jealous, and starts to give him some rather ignoble qualities, however, still ultimately a positive. So I love seeing those takes on Lancelot as a character, one of the most central figures in all the Arthurian tales, and seeing a bit of a different spin. I thought it was so well done. I thought it was fantastic. And to think that essentially because of, and for Durf in Cornwell's version, because Durfell, who knew Lancelot and knew him to be a bad guy, and is writing this tale, to know that the queen that he's writing this for is going to, because of her wish to see Lancelot as noble, is going to is partly responsible for turning this tale of Lancelot into, changing essentially his entire character to suit what she wants the narrative to be, that he, in fact, he was noble and wonderful and chivalrous. So that was very interesting, though, that was done.
Yeah, that you brought that up. So let's talk about how Dervel is, in fact, a frame narrator of a sort. You've got two narrations going. He's writing this manuscript. That's the frame, and he's doing it for the queen of Gwynedd in the present. And he is inserting his own little, dialogue with her, even as he tells this much older story, because he's a survivor of the Arthurian times, and the historical sainted monk figure Dervel Gadarn, in fact, lived a long life. If we can rely on the dates, he lived a long time, like 90 years or something like that. So it's a cool character to pick for this retrospective on the Arthurian times, and he's a really great frame narrator, because you've got these simultaneous stories in a way going on, and they are kind of linked, of course, in a way, because Dervel is a character in both, and you've also got a very loathsome character who's in both narratives, who's also much younger in the main narrative, but is appearing in the we'll talk about him as well. Supposed saint, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, we'll talk about him. Nasty character.
Yeah, and I what I also loved about the tale is that Durfell himself admits throughout telling the story that he does tweak and embellish certain aspects, because he either feels it's more pragmatic to tell the tale that way, etc. And then we know that Igraine is ultimately going to change what she wants to change, and essentially romanticize so many elements of the tale, so that it's more salacious and more readable, and just So I love that element of what Cornwell did there.
I think it's brilliant, because I think it's Cornwell also acknowledging, look, we have just an incredibly vast and disparate array of stories that have gone into this legendarium, the Arthurian matter of Britain, all of that, and they contradict each other. And there's all. And this is, I think, him having Dervel mess with the narrative, and also Igraine later say, well, I'm going to fix it when I have it translated, because I don't like your version of Lancelot, and just the acknowledgement of that is that we are dealing with legend here. We don't know the truth, do we, necessarily? We're getting a truth through Dervel's recollections, but even he acknowledges, I made that part a little more sexy, or I made that battle sound a little better, because it would have been more boring if I had written it the way it really happened, So I love that Cornwell acknowledges the slipperiness of the fact that we can't really know the truth about the Arthurian story, but here is a version of it for you, right? Which is what all the other versions are as well. So that's very cool.
And you can imagine that historically. I mean, I know, being a scholar in general, and you look at someone like Bede, and the ecclesiastical history of the English people. He snobs Arthur. However, he does reference Ambrosius Aurelianus as a leader of the Britons, and a lot of people feel that he didn't want to refer to Arthur. However, that character may have been one. Arthur may be a composite of many historical figures that lived at different times,
right.
And but again, I just find that fascinating that someone like Bede doesn't even mention Arthur. However, that he may have existed for Bede in the form of Ambrosius.
Yep. So, anything else non-spoiler that we want to talk about in terms of Cornwell's done an amazing thing, really, here, and he's done his homework, and he's done something clever in having the frame narrative And just a big enthusiastic. I loved it, and I'm looking forward to book 2 very much. And if you're a fan of Arthurian stuff and you haven't read the Warlord Chronicles yet, don't be like me and wait too long. So, anything else you want to say, PL, non-spoiler?
No, other than just I think for those of you who love have grown up on the very traditional, knights in shining armor, Arthur, this is not that, but it's better for it, I believe. It's it having this kind of interpretation and this, as you said, with this Dark Ages feel, in the more rudimentary, arms and armament. I just think it gives it a really special and unique feel to it compared to other Arthurian.
Yeah, there is an authenticity to it that I find compelling as well. So, yeah, awesome. All right. And great to see you. Awesome. Excellent. You are more than welcome. And we've got lots of fans of this series here right now.
Yeah.
So it is great to have you all here. But I think Alan has given us a sort of a starting point. Let's go with Alan's question suggestion here. Can we talk about what a good character Arthur is? He's so flawed and so noble and so infuriating. And
absolutely frustrating.
Fantastic observation. So, PL, you want to go with that? What is your response to Alan?
Yes, Arthur is perhaps the most frustrating character of the entire novel. Of course, we're seeing from Durfell's perspective. He's someone who absolutely bows and reveres kings and the nobility, and he's someone who is eminently tied to his oaths, a man of his word, and those two things. And the dichotomy of Arthur is that he's ambitious, but he fights against his own ambition, even when he knows that his ambition would lead him to essentially the rulership of Britain. But then that's the right thing to do, because the king that he's sworn to is not a good person and would be a horrible ruler. So that in of itself is perhaps one of the most frustrating elements of Arthur. The slavish, fealty to his oaths and to respecting the authority of royalty really, is a good point, Alex, that we discussed his oath. Really, Philip, will be shown to you, I can't spoil it, in the next book. If you think you're frustrated with Arthur now, wait until the next book. You're going to, you might actually really dislike him because of the slavish fealty to his word and what the consequences of that are. So, but again, he is frustrating in that as well. He does something really impulsive, and in this book that, again, this, essentially overturns the entire, power structure, causes a war, costs many lives, ruin, heartache, all because of this rather selfish thing that he does. And
we're doing spoilers now.
Okay, so he essentially he goes back on his word in his marriage to someone he needs to make an alliance with. That dooms Britain, and all for the sake of essentially a landless princess in Guinevere.
Yeah, and
because he's fallen madly in love with her, breaks his betrothal. And
it was a case of insta love too. Boing, right?
Yeah,
the heart-shaped eyeballs coming out of his head, going, and there's Guinevere, and whoa, he's about to marry someone else. For an alliance so that he can unite Britain against the Saxons, and he's on the verge of realizing his dream of kicking out the Saxons. And one woman in the back of the of the room he sees and going, and it's all over, right?
And a woman who is ruthless and ambitious, more ambitious than him, and her is essentially social climbing, right?
Yeah,
forsaking for a much more virtuous and honest and good person in Sue. And so, I mean, it's not even as if he left a one woman for a better one. So, that is the frustrations with Arthur are numerous. but yet he has this goodness, this innocence almost. He yearns for peace. I think that's also something that runs through the novel. Arthur yearns for peace. He claims he wants a simple life where he just wants to be essentially a homemaker and farm and take care of his wife and kids. But yet he can't help being in the middle of the political machinations that shape Britain. He can't help himself, right?
Yeah.
So, and of course he has, and in all fairness to Arthur, he's someone who's been disenfranchised. He's a bastard son of the High King. He
Right.
hasn't been. He's been disowned by the High King. He is blamed for the death of his half brother, the legitimate heir Mordred.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing that Cornwell does. Yeah.
So he has this very complex, place in the historical context. He's this great warlord that everyone wants on their side, but yet he's actually disowned and not acknowledged by his own father. So yeah.
So we are talking about Cornwell's version of these characters. Let me just, because they're very different Arthurs in some of the other stories.
Yes.
But yeah, I would agree with everything you said in terms of his inner conflict. And Dervel says it perfectly. He talks about how Arthur is like a chariot drawn by two horses, and one of these horses is honor and morality and all of that, and the other is ambition. And it's the ambitious horse that's on the right, the one that really calls the shots, and ultimately. And I feel like when he betrays Cynwyn, the woman he was betrothed to, and in order to make that alliance, to realize his dream, and goes after Guinevere, yes, it's a kind of it's a kind of immediate love that is portrayed in the High Middle Ages all the time.
Yes.
This chivalric, oh my goodness, an arrow pierces your heart and you're suddenly like just head over heels, which that kind of thing does get portrayed in more of the High Middle Ages, not in the Dark Ages actually so much, but there you could find it in some older Celtic sources too, the idea of falling in love instantly like that. But I feel like that's also part of Arthur's ambitious side, maybe too. That I'm greater than everyone else. I can discard this woman that I was supposed to marry because this other woman is just perfect for me in the moment. Or I mean, maybe he was just simply not in control of himself in that moment. That is possible too. It's the old Faulkner quote, right? There's nothing worth writing about but the human heart in conflict with itself, and you see that with Arthur all the time. The ambition versus the honor and the morality and everything else. But essentially a noble character, but also a deeply flawed one, isn't he?
Yes, and then again, you will see more and more of the flaws again throughout book 2 and book 3. Those flaws will really rise to the surface, to the point where you start to perhaps question, how honorable what really is Arthur, and that, and also that, the whole purpose, I believe, of the story being told through the eyes of Derfel, is that Derfel, while no character is perfect, he has become, I believe, one of the most beloved characters in fantasy because he is so good, nominally decent. He is a lot of fantasy readers' favorite. Anyone who's read this series, if you ask them about your favorite all-time characters, Derfel ends up being, I believe, one of them. So, I think that, so the choice to use Derfel as a narrator, rather as, traditionally Arthur is the main character, for the series, I think that was an interesting choice, but one that worked really, really well.
Good. Yeah, I would agree with that. Heidi had a question earlier, and I wanted to talk about, of course, we have to talk about Merlin, who was absent for much of The Winter King. And when he shows up, turns out to be kind of an absent-minded dude. And of course, he shows up not in Britain itself, but in Brittany, where Dervel has gone to defend this other kingdom, which is, they're relatives over there, so that's understandable. Some of the Britons had fled to what is now Brittany in France, and those Bretons over there were essentially like cousins. But he's sent over by Arthur because Arthur, again, conflicted. He made this promise that he would send people over. And when Unas Trebes is being overrun by the Franks, it's Dervel who's there, right? And witnesses all this and meets Lancelot and Galahad and all of that. But Merlin has been hanging out there in disguise as a monk, doing his research. So that was a great reveal. I have to say that was fantastic, and immediately established what a curmudgeonly, eccentric, jolly at the same time. All these weird things, and somehow just above everything. Like he doesn't seem to care about the characters as individuals. He has a bigger vision.
Yes.
He has this vision of restoring Britain to what it was. He's got to find these 12 treasures and restore the Britons to their supremacy and defeat the Anglo-Saxons and all that. So thoughts on Merlin, PL?
Yes, and I love the irascible, like you said, curmudgeonly, sarcastic, witty, extremely intelligent, but also very, very, in a lot of ways, callous towards anything other than his ultimate mission. You will see as series go on. Merlin does not really care about a lot of people. Yes, perhaps some of it is an act in terms of the characters that he actually cares about, but he pretends that he doesn't. However, ultimately, and yes, I want to pick up on Heidi's point that is one of my favorite parts of the book. Unas Tribus, Mount St. Michael, essentially. In French, Michel is a beautiful, stunning location, and to see Cornwell's depiction of it, in the 5th, 6th century as this pinnacle of culture and art and learning. And the Library of King Ben that is has so many of the world's at the time the greatest scrolls and academic texts, and it was just such a stunning visual, right? That this was the epicenter of culture, and that this sense of loss when it's destroyed, right? It was just really poignant. I absolutely loved it. But going back to Merlin, yes, Merlin is ruthless and very pragmatic in his. He dismisses people. He's very dismissive. He says outright that he will use people for his own. All that matters is the treasures of Britain and restoring Britain, and everyone else is essentially a throw piece, a pawn, including Arthur himself. He outright says that, right? But then he does at moments show his soft side and his vulnerable side, and it's always interesting when he sees that. And I think let's not forget that Derfel is considered charmed because he escaped a death pit. As a child, he was thrown into this pit by another Druid, Timbers, and he escaped. He lived. He survived. Instead of being impaled, he survived. And as a result, Merlin saw that he was blessed and brought him under his wing, right? And so Merlin plays has a lot of important roles in the book. But one of them too is that he is showing that nothing else matters except for Britain being restored, right? And he will do whatever it takes, sacrifice anyone. It doesn't matter who you are. He's willing to do that. But yes, I love the sarcasm. I love the wit, the biting humor, the dark humor. I love and he's this figure that is larger than life. That because the Druids essentially have impunity, regardless of which side they are on in terms of an enemy, that they can, enter, walk in, do what they want to do, say what they want to say, and not be harmed. So there's a certain amount of plot armor that the Druids have. So I also found that really interesting the way
they're seen as neutral parties. Yeah.
Yes.
Want to acknowledge our friend Angela? Well, she's here. Hello. And I love this point that Upper Norwood makes in reaction to what you were saying, PL. The sense of poignancy and loss is one of the best aspects of this trilogy. That is essential to this story, and I just think you put it beautifully there, Upper Norwood. That for me is the heart of it. Really, is the sense of this is a story of the past slipping away right before
Yes.
our eyes, and Merlin is trying to stop that, and Arthur is trying to stop that, and they are willing to sacrifice so much. Dervel himself is a pawn in all of this,
Yes.
and he knows it. Like when Merlin uses him, he still doesn't know it's Merlin. He thinks it's father or whatever, and he makes him essentially implants magically, maybe because this is fantasy.
Yeah.
In this idea that he has to save this guy in the moment of crisis. And Dervel has that moment where they're about to escape. And he's like, wait, I got to save Father Ding Dong, this curmudgeonly old guy up in the, I don't know why, but that's been planted in him in a sense. And you could say maybe it's that unconscious, maybe he knows it's Merlin unconsciously. I mean, he grew up with Merlin. Merlin saved him when he was a kid for a purpose, right?
Or is it simply Derfel's nobility and the fact that this this old man said, "I'm in your care, Derfel. No matter what happens, you're responsible for me." Derfel and Galahad have almost escaped the sack of the city. They're almost out. And Derfel's like, I gotta go back. Gal's like, what are you talking about? You gotta go back. I gotta go back and save this old dude. Like, what are you talking about? We gotta get out of here. And they risk everything to do this. But yet, can you imagine if he didn't? But I think for me, it was about, and whether or not, and again, I agree with you, Philip, the magic here is very subtle. We're not sure. What I love about the series, you're not sure if the magic is actually real, if it is, something, it's a figment of people's imagination. Is it just what people believe? Versus something that's tangible, but yeah, that in this case, I think it's just one of the times we see Derfel's nobility, that he's not going to forsake an oath, like Arthur. Yeah. That's one thing they have in common. He's not going to forsake an oath. He's not going to go back on his word. And this old man has given himself into his keeping, and the city is burning around them and being sacked by the Franks. But yet Derfel's going to go back. And what I loved about that is Galahad's loyalty to Derfel. The friendship that they've built up over fighting the Franks over the few years that they were doing that, and that Gal is not gonna abandon him either, and he's gonna go back no matter what, and try and save him. So, but I did love that aspect of
and I mean, just to finish up on Upper Norwood's point, I love how this is such a big part of the overarching story here. Is can we save Britain? Can we bring back the past? And that's a fantasy type of question. This is a question that fantasy lovers are used to and love exploring. Some other really great things here. How do we feel about Nimue? I want to talk about Nimue in the context of Merlin as well, because it was one thing for me to see how Merlin used Arthur, and one thing for me to see how he used Dervel. But the way he was, and he's like basically, well, and Heidi's talked about the Isle of the Dead as well.
Yes.
Where Dervel assumed that Merlin was going to save Nimue. Like Nimue is there, you're going to save her, right? And he's like, yeah, whatever. And then Merlin takes off. And later on, he's like, well, Dervel, I knew you were going to save her, so it's okay. Or he's just like, Nimue can take care of herself, Hello? I mean, it's just as Merlin again. Nothing matters more than the big picture here, right? Than the salvation of Britain, the return to that. But I felt bad actually for Nimue, who is basically like a vessel. I feel like she is treated as a vessel by Merlin. He takes her on as a young girl, as a lover. First of all, maybe that's part of, I don't know, his training of her and all of that. I know she used to go through those three forms, the three forms of madness, right?
Yes.
And in order to become what he needs her to be in order to serve his purpose. So I feel like it's him using her. Does he have affection for her? Does he hide that affection? Alan said earlier that he thinks maybe Merlin does feel for Arthur. He just, everything else takes second seat to the salvation of Britain. And the same could be said maybe of Nimue, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I'd have to agree. And Nimue undergoes so much in this book. She's raped. She loses an eye. Yeah. She is condemned to being mad and sent to the Isle of the Dead. And she's such. What I love about Nimue is her fierceness, and her uncompromising will to survive. Right. Yes.
And she's commitment to the cause.
Yeah. Hey, and she saves Derfel and his troops during the big battle, the big the ultimate battle at the end of the book. She leads them and nearing leads to the dark, where Durfel's confidence fails.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
Plays a
And
pretty important role there.
and what I think was really sad about Nimue is that after is for me was the scene after she and Durfel, after Durfel rescues her from the Isle of the Dead, and and he's nursing her back to health, and they have a time where they become lovers, and for a time it seems perhaps they both think that maybe this, because Durfel has loved Nimue throughout, perhaps they can have a happy life together. And then she realizes that no, but the mission has to come first, right?
She has that one moment when she and Dervel have an intimate scene where she seems to let her just be a person, just to let herself be herself. Otherwise, maybe this is something she has in common with Merlin, and he recognizes that in her, that complete and utter dedication, the willingness to deny the self in order to serve the cause. And she does it more than anyone in here. She really does. But clearly Dervel had feelings for Nimue, and that scene happens, and then he meets. It's an interesting relationship here. It's unconventional. Let's put it that way. That Dervel and Nimue have, because he clearly loves her in a romantic way when they're younger, and she's like, "Yeah, grow up, grow up, Dervel. We can be buddies, but nah." But she has that one moment of vulnerability of embracing him, and it's a beautiful scene.
Yes, it is.
But then he has his insta love moment with Kindwin. He had met her before and admired her, but it's that moment when they're looking into each other's eyes. It's like doing, and Dervel has this. Does he forget about Nimue? No, not really. It's a different kind of relationship. How would you characterize the relationship between Dervel and Nimue? It's a tough one to explain because there is a romantic element to it, but I think the friendship is primary, and it becomes more primary as this book goes along. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I would say it was the difference between having a high school sweetheart that you've loved or had a crush on for years, and perhaps you've dated and or broke up, but there's still those deep ties there. As you said, it's a friendship. There's a romantic, attraction. But yet, knowing essentially though that you're not meant to be together, because, and the thing is, with Nimue, of course, her knowing and being farsighted and seeing, Nimue has already forecasted since they were young. Therefore, you're going to grow up to be a great warrior. You're going to grow up to be instrumental for Arthur and the fight for Britain and the fight for the gods. You're going to be, someone who is important in your realm and in your area of expertise, but I am dedicated to this mission. So for those reasons, we can cooperate and collaborate when it's convenient and when it serves the purpose of the mission, but we can't be together because that in of itself would be counterproductive for the mission. I can't fall in love. I can't have the entanglements. You need to go on and do your thing, so we can't really be together, right? But when you meet Theowen, that is very much, I think that whole, like you said, that just like Arthur and Guinevere, that, insta love and, almost, like, this is my ideal woman, she has all the ideal virtues that whereas with Nimue, Derfel knows her flaws. He knows her faults. He knows, there's someone he knows intimately, right? As opposed to Theowen, who is like this put on a pedestal, right? This shining example of what a woman should be, right? So I think that his relationship with Nimue, again, is very much old high school sweethearts, old, the romantic attachments are more nostalgic, rather than, built for a lasting type of relationship. Whereas, of course, it's different with Derfel and Theowen.
Yeah. All right, I think you put that very well. I just want to acknowledge some of our friends here. Joanna is here, and Mick Scarfield.
Yeah,
And,
scary film.
Dream Master. No, I have not read The Bright Sword, just to answer that question. But yeah, have you read The Bright Sword?
No, I have not.
Okay. Good thoughts in the chat as well on Nimue. And I think she's an incredibly heroic figure for me in this. I feel terrible for her in a way. I feel like she's used a lot, but she's just so committed and driven and fierce. And she's the one who gives us a sort of the peek behind the curtain in terms of, is this magic? Is this? And I love how she keeps it ambiguous, but she does acknowledge to Dervel, look, some of this is just show. You gotta, how brave of her when those the druid and the king show up at Merlin's place there, and she just basically puts on a show to keep him out of his room, right? I mean, she's just incredibly brave through all of this and dedicated. So I admire her deeply. I know she had a couple haters there in the chat.
I think those are people who have read the series, of course, and understand her later role in different events.
I of course I know so many different Arthurian legends, but in many of them, Nimue betrays Merlin in a lot of the versions of the Arthurian story. Now, I don't know what Bernard Cornwell does, but in a lot of the versions, Nimue is his lover and ends up stealing his power, sealing him in a tree, essentially. So I'll see what Cornwell does with that. Anyway. Heidi, I have not listened. You asked earlier. I didn't get to answer that, but I have not listened yet to the narration. I know you recommended it. PL, have you listened to the audiobook?
No, I have not. I've heard various pronunciations of that name over the years, of course. I just simplified in my own head, she's Nimue, but that doesn't mean that that's the correct pronunciation. So apologies to anyone who, knows exactly the pronunciation, but I always call her.
I don't know how anyone would get Namui out of it, but okay.
I've heard that pronunciation as well. But.
All right, interesting. I'm trying to give them the Welsh pronunciation, so that's why you hear me rolling my R's when I say Dervel. But yeah, I don't know what the audiobook says, but I've heard it's a good performance anyway. So we've talked about. And here's Joanna's has. Okay, so there's an endorsement.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how good or bad his pronunciation of the Welsh names is. Not all the names are Welsh. There's some Roman names in here as well, which is kind of fitting because there's a few of these, Britons are hanging on to their post-Roman heritage a bit. Some even wearing kind of like Roman outfits and stuff.
Togas and the Roman scale armor, and even Arthur's armor is Roman, and I think his fastidiousness with the white cloak that he wear, I think it's very much inspired by the Romans, and I think I that Roman influence, and that very much you see this it translates into Cornwell's Saxon stories, this admiration for Roman society that, especially now they've gone and they've left these ruins, and that they could build things that way with stone. Only they could build roads and infrastructure and aqueducts that way, and this admiration for that society, even though it was oppressive, and even though they oppressed the Britons, that once they're gone, the colonizers are in some way worshipped, right? And yes, there are definitely some Easter eggs in both. If you read both series in their entirety, which I have, you'll see that there's a similarity there with that. So, but I won't go further because I know, Philip, I think you've read the first book in the.
I've read most of them.
Yeah. Well, I've read the entire thing, obviously back there on my shelf. So yeah,
he is one of your favorites, isn't he? Yeah.
Yes, he is. He is.
I'll tell you, one of my favorite Arthur moments is the duel with Owain, which was really cool. And that's a moment where you do see Arthur's more honorable side come out, because he knows that Owain is lying.
Yeah.
And that he had done that horrible atrocity. He had killed those innocent people in order to get rich. Arthur knows it. He also, though, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, he's doing it out of honor, but Arthur is also doing it because he needs to get rid of this rival.
Yeah.
Owain. So he has it's that dual nature again, isn't it? And it's such a cool scene, the way he feigns in that moment to sort of stumble, and he uses that moment to basically do what Owain said he never did, which is to thrust forward with the sword, because Owain is going he just likes to slash, and Arthur does exactly the opposite of what Owain expects. And the thing is, he knew that Owain had that opinion of him, and he uses all of that. You can see his cleverness in that moment beautifully, can't you?
Yeah, it was a fantastic scene, one of my favorite duels in fantasy, in that especially the mismatch of this big, brutish, hulking Owain with his reputation as, the king's champion and a badass. Arthur, of course, having an equally, if not a greater reputation, but you would think physically a mismatch. But you see the side of Arthur as how good a warrior he is, how skilled he is. But yes, you're absolutely right, Philip. I saw that much more as pragmatism, that Arthur knowing that, first of all, Owain is not trustworthy. He's not honorable. You can't have someone like that guiding and steering, being part of the council that is responsible for caring for the king and caretaking of the kingdom. He's a rival, and eventually they were going to come to a head, and Arthur knew that, and said, what better way to dispose of my rival under this honorable, like Arthur couldn't outright murder Owain. He couldn't cause a war with him, because that would cause other people's lives. He essentially found the vehicle through what Owain did, and Derfel, knowing that Derfel was part of it. Remember, and I think a lot of it was very strategic. I think Arthur foresaw that some of this would happen when he gave Derfel to Owain as his service. I think he wanted someone within Owain's camp that
he was thinking that far ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I think Arthur plays the long game, that he would want someone who would be willing to essentially betray Owain, or to at least tell his secrets to Arthur, which would give Arthur the justification for removing him. Yep. And I think that because in all things, Arthur does play the long game. That's one of his skills in terms of forecasting alliances. When Arthur does things, other than what happened with Guinevere, you can see his stratagem at play.
There was no strategy involved with the Guinevere.
No, none. But you see that everything he does.
It was a different part of his anatomy was leading into that moment.
Yeah, he's thinking the other head. So, but yeah, you see, I think that was very strategic. And what I also loved about that duel was that the stakes were high, in that it essentially Derfel felt extremely guilty about participating in essentially an atrocity, right? He felt extremely guilty. And this was almost a way for his honor to be redeemed, because he couldn't break the oath that he was sworn to about, divulging what happened. And of course, he paid a price in that Owain's other men held it against him and wanted to kill him for that. And Nimue interjected and saved him there once again. But
Nimue saved the day again.
Yeah, and it was great when you see later, which is really another really poignant moment at Luck Vale, when he meets these warriors of Owain, who he feels it was this grudge, and they all ask for forgiveness and they reconcile, and they're united in battle against this bitter enemy. Yeah. So but yeah, I think that duel was outstanding, and that sense of seeing just how good a warrior Arthur was, that he's on that level, was great in itself. But yeah, one of my favorite duels.
Yep, and just the long game, the mind. I mean, he's got. That's what made him a great leader. That's what makes a great leader, is that foresight, but the willingness to put himself in danger there in the moment too, taking a bit of a risk, but knowing that he's already got this opponent who underestimates him. Pretty good stuff. So we haven't talked about Guinevere a whole lot yet. We probably should. We've talked about Nimue, and we haven't talked about Morgan at all. I feel a little bad for Morgan being also, in a way, being used by both, her father and by Merlin. Uther uses Morgan in a way, but also so does Merlin, and she's got two masters there in a sense. So she's an interesting conflicted character. And of course, she has the disfigurement as well in this version of the story. I don't feel like she's quite as prominent as Nimue or Guinevere in here, but maybe she'll be doing more in future books. An interesting portrayal of Morgan for sure, who does play a big role in the eventual dismantling of Camelot. There's no Camelot per se here, but in the Arthurian vision, let's say.
Yeah, Morgan, as opposed to some of the later interpretations, where she has this essentially incestuous relationship with Arthur through magic that breeds Mordred. That's not the case here. However, she's very, very attached in a brotherly, sisterly way. She's bereft of affection. She very much loves Arthur and wants to be close to him. And and she's one of the few people that she cares about. But Morgan also someone who is willing to make those sacrifices. It wasn't her sacrifice, but when you realize that when after we see the Tor is invaded and you think that Mordred is killed, there's actually been a swap that he's been swapped with the child of the nursemaid, and Morgan has.
That was clever. That was Morgan's cleverness there. Yeah, and it was kind of brutal because the poor couple had to give up their own child in order to save the king. And the way he puts it is, well, I'm a carpenter. That's a king's son.
Exactly. So in other words, the sacrifice, as much as it hurt me personally, is for the betterment of the kingdom. So, but Morgan is also almost, I feel that Merlin, again, has manipulated the situation he likes to keep Nimue and Morgan as foils for each other, because it keeps both on their toes, right? And as well, Morgan, has a lot of bitterness and anger, just like Nimue does. And I see those characters being very similar in that regard. Morgan, again, not acknowledged as a legitimate child of Uther's, right? And so when you say that the usury, that's what Uther does. He just uses, people and women in this world do not fare well, and how they're treated it's brutal the way they're treated by men. But I feel like Morgan as well, a very powerful character, and a character that is underrated in how important she is to the overall series, as you'll see. But I like this version better than the more the femme fatale version of the later interpretation. So yeah, I really like that version of Morgan.
Yeah, it's an interesting, complex version, and I haven't seen behind the mask, really, literally and metaphorically, if you know what I mean. I haven't gotten to know this character terribly well yet, but I feel bad for her. I like and I'm rooting for Nimue, although I have a feeling she's probably going to do something controversial down the line. But I like her, especially because of her relationship with Dervel. And I feel bad for Morgan. But I haven't quite decided yet how I feel about Cornwell's Guinevere. Now, there are sympathetic portrayals of Guinevere within the larger, cosmos of Arthurian stories. But there are also some very incredibly misogynistic portrayals of Guinevere within that sphere. So it runs the line from she's a sympathetic character who just happened to be married off to a husband who didn't really care for her very much. This Arthur is crazy about her, so that's not the case here. But she seems to be a bit of an attention seeker at the very least. Also, there is the complication that her father's lost his kingdom in this version, and he, Leodegan, I think his name is, he's they're looking to find a way to get back into wealth and power. So you get the feeling that does Guinevere care for Arthur in this version, in your opinion, or at least we're going with the Winter King here. I know you know the whole story intimately. Just going with this book, do you think that she actually cares for Arthur, or is she simply using him? And of course, in every story of Arthur, it's Lancelot and Guinevere who end up having an affair, which causes the ruin of everything. I don't know what Cornwell's going to do with that, but I'm expecting that because right now, Lancelot is taking care of Guinevere. So I'm thinking, so we'll see. But yeah, what are your thoughts on Guinevere?
Well, at this juncture of the story, not to spoil things, this is what I'll say about Guinevere. I'll say that it's clear that, as you so aptly point out, she loves the attention. She likes to have every man's eyes on her. Realizing, of course, that ambition, I think the one thing that joins her and Arthur is ambition, that she is very ambitious and is essentially, in a way, marrying above her station, even though Arthur is not technically considered a royal. She tries to elevate that to essentially, grant him this princess. She is someone who is very much behind him, that, he should be the one to rule Britain as opposed to Mordred. Everybody knows that Mordred is unfit, right? Even as a child.
He's a baby,
right?
Also, you see, he's unlucky because of his clubfoot, right?
Yeah, but there's very much this hint that Mordred is not fit because of the clubfoot, and also because he's a child, and Arthur is the most powerful warlord in Britain and the one who is capable of unifying the British. That Arthur is the one who should be ruling. So I think certainly, and because Guinevere is essentially landless, and as we talked about it, as you mentioned, her father's lost their kingdom, and she is marrying Arthur. Yes, perhaps it's true, but also strategically, it's a great move for Guinevere and her family, right? And and realizing too that throughout the book, the men in the nobility and in the patriarchy talk about the only real reason to marry is for political advantage, wealth, etc. But the women in turn should be doing the same thing, right? It's said throughout the book that it's quite you expect to have your mistresses and when Arthur betrays Theowen, many of his the males opine that, hey, just have Guinevere as your mistress but marry Theowen. Have as many mistresses as you want. We don't care, but honor your commitment and marry Theowen. So but I think for Guinevere, and again, you see a lot more of her character in the second, third books. She really becomes a really well fleshed out and important character. That you can imagine that ambition is really the common thread, I think, that unites. You remember Arthur? Yes, he saw her and he was into love, and whatever else he did that night when he spent talking to her for the whole night. They found, I think, common goals. They found commonality and shared, ideals. And I think he found her interesting, intelligent. I think those are things that drew him to, and she's extremely intelligent, extremely capable, and she is one of the most capable people in the whole series.
I do like her for at least her feud with Sansom. At least she's against Sansom and in all of this, which could get her in some trouble as well. But she has a certain ferocity to her, doesn't she? Yeah. Yes,
as most of the female characters do. They're ferocious because I think they have to be, and surviving as a woman.
Kynwyn, though, poor Kynwyn.
Not Kynwyn, but even Kynwyn has a medal. That perhaps understated. She does have a medal.
True.
I think to be a woman in this context, in this dark age, is I mean, it's tough to be a woman in any historical context, but in this particular one is extremely brutal, and to survive and to be someone who wields influence and to have power, it takes a lot. So but I think we're going to talk a lot more about Guinevere as the series goes on. I have a feeling.
I have a feeling we will.
So a lot more to say about her.
And I'm sure, if Cornwell goes the traditional Guinevere Lancelot route, there's going to be something going on, some shenanigans there. But for now, I'll just say Lancelot is indeed, and Bernard Cornwell makes him the most loathsome Lancelot ever. Let's just say that. There's no other Lancelot that is as less sympathetic a portrayal. And this guy's a complete fraud. A complete fake. And I often wonder, as I was reading this, did he do this kind of because Lancelot was a later addition to the Arthurian story, maybe? And, he took the place of Sir Gawain to a large degree, who was the preeminent knight. And then this is his way of saying this fake comes along and steals all the credit. That's what Lancelot's that's what he does everywhere. And he also makes Galahad his half brother instead of Lancelot's son, which is usually the case. Usually Galahad is the Lancelot 2.0. Essentially, he's the unflawed, the version of Lancelot that doesn't fail. that is sainted, is holy because of that. And he has the cross on his shield and all that. He gave Galahad a cross on his shield.
Yep, he
I
did.
like that. So you have these two very contrasting half brothers in here. Thoughts on Lancelot and Galahad? I love the relationship between Galahad and Dervel.
Yes,
That's really those guys are homies. They're bros.
Yeah, they're bros. They're bros,
Awesome.
and that relationship is just so wonderful. In that too, they both respect each other's religion, even though clearly they believe what they believe.
Yeah, so I like the element of this. We haven't talked about the Christianity alongside the Druidic faith here too much, but yeah.
Yeah, and they are sworn to each other. They will die for each other. They are, they have, there's a line that says I think they shared everything except women. They're united in all these hopeless causes. Especially trying to save God and Lancelot's father's kingdom for one.
Yeah.
And the Lug Vale quest where Galahad, who would much rather fight beside Dervel, sent off as an emissary to try to convince the other kingdoms to fight on Arthur's behalf. And when I think maybe the one that was tearjerker for me is when Dervel rescues Numine from the Undead and doesn't know how he's going to get off. He's going to have to fight, the watch there, and who shows up? Galahad, and Dervel's like, I should have known that you would have come. You know what I mean? To save me, because you're so. I love their relationship. It is just one of the best parts of it. But Lancelot, you raised some excellent points up as always, but I almost feel that there was a certain amount of not jealousy with some of the maybe why Cornwell. I think it was a case of I don't think Cornwell likes characters that are too pure or
adored, too adored.
Yeah, too adored to the point where hey, why don't we take this character that in almost every iteration and every single representation is just other than his affair with Guinevere, is this perfect knight, the perfect warrior. He's perfect, right? Other than that, why don't we take him and just knocks, just put a bit of put a bit of rust, make this reputation suffer a little bit, tarnish it.
I mean, he's a fraud. He's a coward and a fraud. He's
and maybe that's the worst. And that's probably one of the worst offenses in a warrior culture that exists there. That your victories are not earned, that your reputation is all through the bards, that you never truly, like, in other words, a little bit of embellishment is fine if you actually go and fight. But someone who never actually fights, never bloodies their sword, is never actually in danger, and is the first one to flee. His kingdom is being destroyed. He's the first one off the island.
And puts a fake bandage on to basically show, I was wounded in combat, and Dervel cannot stomach it, right? And his first encounter with Lancelot, where he actually beat the tar out of him, which was awesome.
That was awesome. But Galahad saying, knowing that, hey, you know what, we better leave because Lancelot's not going to stop. He's going to try and kill you.
He's going to try. So
let's get the hell out of here. And that's how their friendship forms. But I think with Lancelot, the other thing is it's very interesting that even despite all this, you hear this belief. Like, Arthur doesn't want to believe that Lancelot is bad and doesn't want to believe that his reputation is exaggerated. Respects him. And there we go back to Arthur's respect of royalty. He's a prince. Now he's a king. He's a landless king. We need to do something for him. He's valuable. We need to find him lands. We need to honor him. And even Galahad saying, I know my brother is messed up, but he might not be that bad a king just by virtue of some of his other qualities. So you see this thread about, he's not so bad, he's not so bad, he's not so bad, and yet people know how bad he is, but are willing to tolerate him. You can imagine that's not going to go well, right? Because,
it is an interesting statement about being a king and a leader too, though, isn't it? Like, how many leaders that we think of as great were really manipulative, good PR people, not nearly the polished image that we think of from history, but were probably ruthless and did not stop at telling lies about themselves in order to aggrandize themselves, right? So yeah,
That's,
it's an interesting theme that's introduced that way. Yeah.
that is what. Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's part of Dervel's awareness of the slipperiness of this narrative, and him. We mentioned in the beginning the idea that he changes the narrative a little bit. He's like, yeah, I'm making that part a little more interesting, you know, or Igraine is going to further change the narrative when she has it translated by the other guy, you know. So yeah, what was your point?
No, and I love that willingness to. We see it all the way up until Maritimes. You know, the narrative, changing the narrative, fake news. Playing with the victor, playing with what actually happened. That accuracy in historical accounts is less valuable than making things look a certain way, sound better, or suit the person who's triumphed. And I love that Cornwell has taken that theme and played with it. And again, these are all some of the reasons why he's had such an influence on me as an author, because of some things that he does with his writing. But specifically with Lancelot, before we leave Lancelot, there's also that element of, but yet outwardly he's described extremely handsome. Deerfield admits more reptilian-like handsome, but handsome, charismatic, someone who people be drawn to. He looks the part. When he gets all, dolled up in his armor, he looks the part of the hero. He is someone, and I think that's a big commentary that, some is just about looking good and looking the part, right? Someone who is attractive and looks like a great king, people think automatically they are, right? And I think that a lot of that has to do with why Lancelot got away with so much, because people
we want to believe in our heroes.
Exactly. We want to believe that this handsome, man from this fallen king, this lost kingdom is the real deal, but he's a fraud.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there are other frauds of a sort in here too. There's Gundlace, who straight up sticks a sword down Norwenna's throat, and pretending to be her husband. And then we realize what a villain he is in that moment, when he kills his wife. And of course, I feel like Gorvaded, who is the king of Gwynedd, or no, sorry, Powys. He's the king of Powys. He's a more straightforward guy, actually. He's kind of the main villain in a way, but he's not in the sense that he's not as deceitful as Lancelot or Gundlace. Gundlace is his little sidekick king, right? But Gorvaded is more straightforward. His whole thing with Arthur is, look, you dishonored me. You dishonored my daughter when you just ran off with Guinevere. And he kind of has a point. I'm not saying you're the guy, but he kind of has a point there, doesn't he?
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about Gorfid, that he's technically in the right in this fight. Like we all want Arthur to win and Derfeld to win and survive, and but when you look at how the war actually happened, Gorfid's in the right. He is the one that's been wrong, and Arthur did knowingly break the alliance that Britain needed, that Arthur worked so hard to get, and then you turn around and do this, right? Like, it's very it is, and Gorfid is also, like you said, he's very blunt and crass and uncouth, but yet he's also very brave. He's a brave warrior, and he'll fight from the front, and he dies.
His arm cut off.
Got his arm cut off by Arthur. He still goes back into battle and dies in battle, and he's but yes, he's mean and vindictive and spiteful, but he's not all wrong. He's not wrong in his stance, nor is he all particularly bad. I think, he's set up as this villain. Gundlace is much more villainous, I think, than
he's deceitful and dishonorable.
And I loved seeing him get his comeuppance.
And he also is the one who I don't know if he did what he did to Nimue. And took her eye out as well. Yes. I did say, I believe I should have said more assaulted. Assaulted. No, it's fine. It's fine.
I did say, but yes, and he gets his comeuppance. And but throughout, I think
Although it's cool that at the end we don't see exactly what she does to him.
Yes.
Cornwell
Yes.
lets us use our imaginations. Like you
Yes.
just hear him scream in that little room where he's cornered by Nimue there. So we know he got it, but we don't. We got to use our imaginations to know what happened to him.
Yeah, which was I think was fantastic, and I think those payoffs were so satisfying to see. The villains, some of these villains get what was coming to them. In the end, it was very satisfying. Therefore, from a child, Tanvers, the only time you can kill a druid is when you hold their life in your hands, because
got it. He's got it.
And Durfal's got it, and it was very, very satisfying to see some of these villains get what was coming to them. But it's funny. There these characters you mentioned, that the one of the greatest things about this series is the characters. They are just larger than life. And we haven't talked about some of the minor characters, the Sagramores, the Coal Witches, the Isas, yes, they're just wonderful characters that seem literally this interpretation of them being put in this dark age setting has really changed them from the knight in shining armor, 13th, 14th, 15th, etc. century interpretations, and really given them this new glow. And again, I absolutely loved it.
Yeah. No, well said. And some of their names are hard to say. Joanna is right, but particularly Gorvadad. That's how you would say that in Welsh anyway. Gorvadad. The F is actually a V sound, and those double D's are a TH sound. If that helps at all. But it's brilliantly done. I also want to highlight this comment by Old Man Logan. Another fascinating aspect of the book is the author's take on religion taking over the country. Maybe this could be our last point, PL, for our discussion today. By the way, guys, we are doing the books 2 and 3 as well. We will be doing book 2 on your channel, PL. I'm sure we're gonna switch back and forth here, but to get to this point, I think it's a really good one, actually, and it's one of the things that makes this fascinating for me is this period, because Christianity was introduced to the Celtic Britons during the period when the Romans were there. Romans initially conquered. They were not Christian, but later in the 4th century, Christianity became the religion of the Roman Empire, and the Britons kind of went along with that. Although in their more remote rural areas, they still stuck to the old faith, the Druidic religions. So it's really a mix at what we have here, and of course the invaders, the Anglo-Saxons, are bringing their own pagan religion along as well. So among the Britons, though, you do have a mixture of old faith, the Druidic, represented primarily by Merlin and Nimue. But then you have the new faith, which is represented not very sympathetically by the Sansom character, who is a pedophile and is a horrible hypocrite, a miser, just an awful character. There are more sympathetic Christians, though, there as well, some of the fellow kings. And Arthur kind of just, he walks a tightrope there. He doesn't overcommit himself to either side here, so that he's able to use the old pagans and the Christians alike. But I love this aspect of it, that this is a time of religious transition here. And this is a big part of what Merlin is trying to do, is revive the old faith, revive the Druidic faith, which was persecuted under the Romans, to bring it back. And that's part of the big picture here as well. So thoughts on that, PL?
Yeah, I think for me, so much of it was about the fact that for all of the different followers of each religion, there's this feeling that, religions, because of the Christian religion specifically, that these religions can no longer coexist the same way. Whereas for the Britons, and Arthur himself is not particularly religious. He as you pointed out, he much more goes with the flow. He's willing to have everyone live together in harmony. Let the Christians have their religion as long as they're not taking over Britain. Let we have our own gods. The Saxons, if we're making truces with them, we're not looking to wipe out their religion, their worship of their religion, even if we conquered them. And so I think, but there's this feeling that with the arrival of Christianity, because Christianity essentially has a mandate of worship of only one religion, that these religions can no longer coexist. And also the feeling of, with the influx of more people of certain religions, the more people that exist in a society that worship a particular religion, the more the other religion and the other gods fade and disappear and die off, right? In other words, that it's so much of it has to do with, like, in other words, their gods die when their followers die out or get suppressed.
Yeah.
And that's a great but it is brought on specifically by the advent, the onset of Christianity, because in Christianity there's no room for any other gods, right? But with the other religions, there's room for, and they don't particularly seem to care about, like, if the Christians were less insistent on this, the pagans seem much more open to, okay, you want to be Christian, hey, great, but they do fear that the Christianity will take over and assimilate, all of Britain. So that's a fear, but that's more tied to the people that are bringing the religion there, right? So it's a very interesting way that Cornwell depicted this clash of religions. Yeah. And how, for some people very ambivalent, they're very apathetic towards, like Arthur is kind of apathetic.
And even Bishop Bedwin, who's, I think he's a more sympathetic portrayal of a Christian during that time. He seems more flexible. He's like, kind of practical. And even at the same time, he's a part of the Mithras,
yes.
There, which, okay, sure. He's got a little bit more flexibility perhaps than somebody like Sansom. But I like Ben's question here as well. Here, the overall flow of the experience for me, I immediately felt immersed because I think both PL and I are PL studied medieval history and literature. Obviously, I did too. So for me, it was like coming home. In a way, it was just like, yes, I was taking a warm bath from page one. But that, I think I'm a little weird maybe in that sense. So I didn't have to get used to, it was not an adjustment as like you suggest here, Ben, that there's an unfamiliarity with the setting for probably the majority of people who would pick this up. And it might maybe take a bit for them to feel that immersion. But for me, I was like you, page one, yay, let's go. I love this so much, PL, were you immediately hooked when you read this?
Oh, absolutely. The setting, it's winter, this child's being born, you're not sure what because you and I, people like you and I, people who've read Arthurian legends are coming in with some of these preconceived notions of what some of these characters are going to be. So when you see High King Uther, when you see Morgan, when you see Nume in the initial chapters, but you have the backstory that there was a Uther's heir named Mordred was slain in battle. Now his wife is expecting. Now the child's gonna be born. Arthur was banished because he's Uther blames him for Mordred's death. You see the Christians, the baby's coming, and Uther and all the pagans worry that the Christians are going to cause the mother and the baby to die, and all the hope rests on the birth of this child and it being a boy in the patriarchal society of Britain. And then so they bring the pagan sorceresses in to try and of course Rowena, the mother who is Christian, rejects that.
She didn't like it.
Yeah. But yet it seems that the pagans saved the day and allowed the baby. Allowed the baby born safely. So yes, I was immediately the setting, everything else. And to Durfell as a child is he's seeing these events. He's in the background. He's the errand runner. But that he's going to be telling this tale later on as an old man. I was immediately immersed. Yeah, absolutely. From day one, I knew this was going to be something special after the first few chapters, and after reading the whole series, as I said, it's now one of my faves. So no, and I was so hopeful, Philip, based on your background and your education that you would, and your reading taste, that you would love it as well. and I'm so happy that.
Oh, yeah, I love it. And of course, Mordred, you mentioned there. I imagine he's got a bigger role to play because he is in most Arthurian stories the villain who everything falls apart. And here he is not Arthur's son, but he is Arthur's in a protective guardian role of Mordred. So he's actually his half brother, I guess he would be, right? Uther's, yeah, right? Do I have that right? No, he's his
nephew. He would be Arthur's
his half uncle. Yeah, I guess.
Yep.
He's Arthur's nephew in this version, and Mordred is usually Arthur's not just illegitimate child, but an illegitimate child with his sister.
Yeah, incestuous. Yeah,
incestuous. And that's So this poor kid doesn't have a chance, I think. He's going to be a villain up and coming. We'll see the bigger role of Guinevere and everything else. I'm really looking forward to what Cornwell does with this. I like that he's changed enough things that I really don't know exactly what he's going to do, even though I'm intimately familiar with the Arthurian story from many other versions of it. I feel like he's doing something unique with it, and I really like that.
I do want to quickly say, as we're winding down here, that one of the things, and I mentioned this I've mentioned on many occasions, Bernard Cornwell is one of the best medieval battle scene writers, period. I mean, his battle scenes are just incredible. I put him up with the Miles Christian Camerons, the Jenny Words, the Stephen Ericksons, like his battle scenes are, the authenticity, the gravitas he brings is just phenomenal. Just phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. Yeah.
Oh, there's
some are. Yeah.
Some are.
Good to see you.
It's good to see you, buddy. He's a great fantasy author himself. So
that's right. Yep. So all right. Well, PL, I think we've done a pretty decent job here of discussing. I'm sure we didn't talk about everything, but I think we did a pretty darn good job. So with that, we'll be reading next month the second book. I don't even know what it's called. What's it called, PL?
It is called The Enemy of God.
Enemy of God. Whoa. Okay. We will be reading this and discussing it on PL's channel at some point in August, about a month from now. So yeah, be on the lookout for that. Thank you to everybody in the chat. Thank you, PL, my good friend. I love spending time with you, and I'm so appreciative that you would, a veteran of the series, come and guide me and help me and help me to better appreciate this story that I am loving so much already.
Oh, I feel the same, Phil. I'm so overjoyed to get the experiences with you, and I can't wait to see your reactions as you continue the series. And what I really can't wait for is, because you're so excellent with analysis, I can't wait to see where this series winds up in the scope of your top series when it's said and done. I have a feeling it's going to rank fairly highly. We'll see, though.
All right, we shall see. We shall see. Stay tuned, everyone. But until next time.
Bye-bye.